In the quiet, sprawling landscapes of Montana, the elderly woman lived in a modest, weathered home that had been in her family for decades. The late afternoon sun poured gently through the lace curtains, casting soft golden patterns across the worn wooden floors. She moved slowly around the house, humming an old tune, preparing for a day she had once cherished: family celebrations. For years, she had been the heart of every gathering, from birthdays to anniversaries, always ensuring the table was set with care and that no detail was overlooked. Today, however, there was an unfamiliar tension in the air. She had prepared a small feast, carefully arranged flowers, and even baked her signature pie. Yet something deep inside her whispered that this time would be different. 12 long years had passed, and she had felt the sting of neglect every single one. Her children, once attentive and eager to celebrate her presence, now seemed to forget her existence on these special days. She paused in the kitchen, looking at the calendar pinned above the counter. Brightly colored circles marked family birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays, reminders of countless occasions where her presence had gone unnoticed. Each year, she had waited patiently, hoping that something had changed, only to be met with empty chairs, unanswered calls, and silent homes. The memories of past disappointments lingered vividly. The birthday cake left untouched, the phone ringing late with hurried apologies, the quiet sadness that no one noticed. Her heart ached not just from being forgotten, but from feeling invisible to those she loved the most. Her eyes wandered to a framed photograph on the wall, a picture from a decade ago. In it, she smiled brightly, surrounded by family members who now seemed distant, not just in space but in emotion. The contrast between the warmth captured in the photo and the cold reality of her present struck her sharply. A soft sigh escaped her lips. She had always believed that family meant unconditional love, that celebrations were moments of connection and joy. Yet here she was, alone in the very home that had once echoed with laughter, music, and shared stories. Despite the loneliness, there was a quiet dignity in the way she moved about the room. She arranged the table neatly, straightened the chairs, and placed the pie carefully in the center, as though honoring a tradition that had outlasted those who had ignored her. Her actions spoke of resilience. Even in her sadness, she maintained grace and patience, clinging to the hope that one day, perhaps, her family would remember her value and her love. As the sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows across the floor, she sat down at the table. Her hands rested gently on the lace tablecloth, her gaze distant yet filled with longing. 12 years of being overlooked had left deep scars, but beneath the pain, there was still a spark of hope, a quiet question lingering in her heart. Would this year be? After years of being overlooked and quietly hurt, the elderly woman decided to reach out to her family, clinging to the hope that perhaps this time, things could be different. She picked up her phone, her hands trembling slightly, and began dialing her children one by one. Each number held the potential for warmth, for acknowledgement, for the familiar voices she had longed to hear. But instead of joy, she was met with brief, distracted conversations, hurried excuses, and the faint, uncomfortable sound of impatience on the other end. She tried sending messages filled with gentle reminders, small notes of love, and invitations for gatherings, hoping to rekindle the connection that had faded over the years. But her texts went unread, or at best received curt replies. "We're busy. Maybe next time," or simply an emoji that felt hollow. Each response, or lack thereof, cut deeper than the last, reinforcing the painful truth she had been avoiding for more than a decade. Her presence no longer mattered to the people she had once placed above everything else. As she sat by the window looking out at the quiet Montana fields, her mind replayed memories of earlier celebrations. She remembered the first few years of being left out, thinking it a mistake or a coincidence. Then the next, when the pattern became impossible to ignore. Now, after 12 years, the realization was unavoidable. She was no longer part of their lives in the way she had once been, and the pain of being repeatedly forgotten weighed heavily on her. The house, once filled with laughter and the comforting scent of shared meals, now seemed too quiet, almost empty. She stared at a family photograph on the wall, tracing the faces with her finger. Those smiles seemed distant now, frozen in a past that no longer existed. She reflected on all the holidays she had spent alone, the birthdays that passed without a phone call or card, and the anniversaries that went unacknowledged. The ache in her chest was not merely sadness, it was a profound sense of invisibility, of being unloved by the very people she had loved unconditionally. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the view of the sprawling Montana landscape outside. She felt a mixture of grief and quiet anger, a sense that she deserved more than neglect. She realized that no amount of reaching out would guarantee the acknowledgement she sought. Her family's neglect was consistent, intentional, and deeply hurtful. In that moment, she understood that if she wanted peace, she could no longer rely on those who had repeatedly failed to value her presence. Yet, amidst the heartbreak, a small spark of determination began to form. She realized that she had a choice: to remain trapped in this cycle of pain and hope, or to reclaim her life on her own terms. For the first time in years, she felt a stirring of independence, a quiet voice urging her to seek a future where she was remembered, appreciated, and loved, not by those who had forgotten her. After years of repeated neglect and heartbreak, the elderly woman reached a turning point. The painful realization of Scene 2, the truth, that her family no longer valued or remembered her, crystallized into clarity. She understood that waiting for apologies, invitations, or recognition was futile. Her happiness and peace could no longer depend on those who had ignored her for 12 long years. With a quiet resolve, she made a life-altering decision. She would vanish not in anger, but in pursuit of her own dignity and self-respect. The evening was calm as she moved through her home, methodical and purposeful. She opened closets and drawers, selecting only the essentials: clothing, a few personal items, and keepsakes that carried real meaning. Each object she packed was a reminder of her independence, a symbol of the life she was about to reclaim. She avoided leaving anything that would tie her to the family that had repeatedly failed her, leaving behind only a short, simple note on the kitchen counter. The note, carefully written, contained no accusations or bitterness, just a quiet acknowledgement that she had chosen a different path, one that prioritized her own well-being. The act of leaving was bittersweet. Memories of laughter, warmth, and shared moments tugged at her heart. She thought of the family gatherings she had missed, the holidays spent alone, and the countless times she had hoped for inclusion. But alongside the sorrow was a sense of liberation. For the first time in years, she was in control of her destiny. She could leave behind the years of neglect and create a future defined by her choices, rather than by the indifference of others. As she stepped outside, the cool Montana air filled her lungs, invigorating her with a sense of possibility. The familiar roads of her town stretched out before her, but she would not look back. She traveled quietly, avoiding attention, blending into the rhythms of life elsewhere. The world beyond her old home offered anonymity, yet with it the chance to rediscover herself. She could be anyone, do anything, and embrace a life free from disappointment and judgment. Throughout her journey, she reflected on the lessons learned from 12 years of invisibility. She realized that her absence might cause confusion, maybe even guilt, within her family, but that was no longer her concern. Her priority was her own peace, her own joy, and her own sense of worth. Every mile she traveled symbolized her growing freedom, each step a break from the past. By the time she found a small town to settle in, she felt a mixture of relief and hope. The decision to vanish had not been easy, yet it had been necessary. She had chosen herself over pain, independence over neglect, and peace over continued heartache. Though the memories of the family she left behind would linger, they no longer held power over her. For the first time in years, she could envision a life filled with purpose, dignity, and genuine happiness. After leaving her old life behind, the elderly woman arrived in a small, welcoming town far from the familiar landscapes of Montana. Here, the pace of life was slower, gentler, and for the first time in years, she felt a sense of calm that was entirely her own. She rented a modest home, a little cabin with a small garden and a cozy interior, perfect for rebuilding. Her life without the shadows of past neglect. The house, though simple, became a sanctuary, a place where she could rediscover herself and reclaim the dignity that had been ignored for so long. The first days were quiet and introspective. She unpacked her belongings carefully, arranging each item with intention. Every photograph, book, and keepsake held memories of a life she had lived with love and devotion. These objects reminded her that, despite being forgotten by her family, her life had value and meaning. She took long walks along tree-lined streets, observing neighbors tending gardens or chatting over fences, and slowly she began to feel a sense of belonging. Soon she found ways to immerse herself in the community. She volunteered at the local library, sharing stories with children and helping organize small events. She joined a knitting circle at the community center, where conversations flowed freely and friendships began to blossom. For the first time, she felt the warmth of connection not born out of obligation, but mutual respect and genuine interest. Each interaction reminded her that love and care could be found outside the confines of her former family. In her home, she tended her garden with patience and pride. Flowers bloomed under her care, mirroring the renewal in her own life. She began to write in a journal, capturing memories, reflections, and lessons learned from the years of neglect and her bold decision to vanish. These writings became a source of clarity and self-expression, allowing her to process her pain and transform it into wisdom. As months passed, she discovered the simple joys she had long neglected. Mornings with warm sunlight streaming through her window, afternoons spent reading on her porch, and evenings laughing with new friends over tea. Her days were no longer defined by waiting for phone, calls, or invitations that never came. They were defined by her own choices, her own rhythm, and her own happiness. The transformation was profound. She felt a sense of empowerment that she had not experienced in decades. She realized that happiness was not tied to recognition from those who had forgotten her, but was something she could cultivate within herself. With each passing day, the pain of the past faded slightly, replaced by a growing confidence, contentment, and self-worth. By reclaiming her life, she became a symbol of resilience and courage, proof that it was never too late to seek joy and independence. Her new life, built on her own terms, was full of purpose, peace, and dignity. For the first time in 12 years, she could smile freely. Years had passed since the elderly woman quietly vanished from her family's life. In that time, she had built a fulfilling, independent existence far from the shadow of neglect. Her days were rich with meaningful connections, personal growth, and a newfound sense of peace. Yet in the back of her mind, there lingered a quiet curiosity. What had become of the family she had left behind? She had no desire for revenge, only a need to understand whether the years of absence had stirred any realization of her value. Meanwhile, her family slowly began to feel the weight of her absence. The birthdays they had once ignored now carried a hollow emptiness. Holidays were quieter and celebrations felt incomplete. Her children and grandchildren, previously indifferent, realized too late that their neglect had caused deep pain. The absence of her warmth, her care, and her quiet guidance became impossible to ignore. They began searching for her, calling old friends, checking with neighbors, and following any leads they could find. Their guilt was palpable, a mixture of sorrow, shame, and the desperate hope of reconciliation. Eventually, their search led them to the small town where she had rebuilt her life. She had made no effort to hide, but she had also set clear boundaries. When they arrived at her modest home, the sight of her standing calmly on the porch was both shocking and humbling. Gone was the woman who had waited in silence for years. In her place was someone confident, composed, and radiating self-assurance. The family members were taken aback by her transformation, realizing that time and distance had not diminished her strength, it had amplified it. The encounter was emotionally charged. Some family members attempted apologies, their voices trembling with regret. Others remained silent, overwhelmed by the weight of their past neglect. She listened patiently, acknowledging the sorrow in their eyes without anger or resentment. Her response was measured. She forgave, not because she owed them forgiveness, but because she had learned that holding on to bitterness only harmed her own peace. She made it clear that her return to their lives would not be dictated by guilt or obligation. It would be on her terms. Some family members embraced her, tears flowing freely as they sought to rebuild the bond they had ignored for so long. Others, unsure or unready to face their mistakes, observed from a distance, silently grappling with regret. Throughout it all, she remained dignified, serene, and unwavering, embodying the life she had chosen for herself. The encounter marked a profound closure. While reconciliation was possible, her happiness no longer depended on the family who had neglected her. She had reclaimed her life, her independence, and her dignity. The story ended not with full restoration or total estrangement, but with a powerful reminder: self-respect and personal peace are worth more than the fleeting